The state of Washington has a proud military tradition, from the powerhouse Joint Base Lewis McChord to Navy Region Northwest to Fairchild Air Force Base. But if you were to ask someone in our state's largest cities in the shadow of the Space Needle, who are the most important industries in Washington? It'd most likely be a homegrown aerospace manufacturer, or maybe a little package delivery service, or maybe even a software company that was started in a garage. What most folks don't know, though, is that Washington is the 7th most military populated state in the country. It's among the top 10 places that DoD spends its money, and the military is the 2nd largest employer, public or private, in the state of Washington. But we have a military-civilian divide. And I'm sure it's not unlike what many other folks here in the room today experience. In Washington, we've worked to close the divide by making an economic argument for the importance of the military and defense economy to our state. I tell folks that the largest defense contractor in Spokane is actually a produce company. And it's not because they're making strawberries that go boom, but rather feeding our service members and their families. This is actually helping to change the dialogue in our state, but we have a long way to go. That's why I'm so excited to be part of this panel and joined by such a distinguished team of speakers. Each of our panelists is well qualified to share insights today, and you can view their bios on the ADC website. But in the meantime, please join me in welcoming Senator Martha McSally from Arizona, Congressman Jimmy Panetta from California, Mr. Steve Austin, the Assistant Chief of the Army Reserve, and Ms. Maureen Casey, COO of the Institute for Veterans and Military Families and Vice Chancellor for Strategic Initiatives and Innovation at Syracuse University. So we're actually going to start with you, Congressman Panetta. You recently wrote an op-ed that highlighted another part of the military-civilian divide. In Congress, specifically, you made the point that only a few decades ago, veterans made up more than 70% of Congress, and today it's only 18%. Last year's election brought a surge of veterans to Congress, including the largest number of freshman class veterans in more than a decade, including Senator McSally. What are your hopes for this new group of veteran members of Congress, and what would you like to see happen, and how can that close the military-civilian divide?
Thank you, and thanks to the Association of Defense Communities and all of you for being here and this opportunity to talk about this topic that I believe is very important for people to continue to know about. Because unfortunately, as we've seen within the last 6 months, there are maybe 3 or 4 freshman members who have been sucking up a lot of the oxygen in the room, and we are not hearing about the members that you just mentioned, the Democrats and Republicans who have served in the military and are here to basically, as I like to say, get things done. And that's important because what I've seen is that, especially last term, when you would turn on the television station and try to find bipartisanship, it would be from a funeral, to be frank. You'd hear the funeral of John McCain, of George Bush Sr., or John Dingell this year. And to me, that was unfortunate. And so to me, I think we are very fortunate to have this great group of freshman members coming in that understand what it means not just to serve, but obviously have that bond of service upon which they can get past party lines and focus on policy and make sure that politics do not come into their decision-making process, at least initially, in talking about what can benefit the country. And so that's why we decided to start the 4-Country Caucus, a caucus right now of 10 Democrats and 10 Republicans in the House level that basically come together and actually talk about legislation that we can agree upon to show leadership that this is an area that these members, Democrats and Republicans, can agree. Martha and I were Senator McSally, I got to get used to calling her Senator now. Senator McSally and I were on a group called called the Problem Solvers Caucus last year when she was in Congress with me in the 115th. These are the types of groups you're not hearing about, unfortunately, and it's our job to continue to promote them. What the Problem Solvers is a group of about 24 Democrats, 24 Republicans that are actually coming together in Congress talking about how we can work together. And most of those freshman members who were active duty, who served, are part of both For Country Caucus and Problem Solvers Caucus. And hopefully we can start this kind of ground up momentum to show leadership that there are areas that we can agree upon, there are areas that we can get some things done.
Well, that's great, Congressman. Thank you. And so to that point, Senator McSally, obviously you've got a distinguished career in the Air Force. After 26 years, you've served all over the world. You've experienced firsthand the different perceptions that people, both in the military and on the civilian side, public and private, have about the military and your service. Now, as a senator, can you talk a little bit about what that civilian-military divide means to you, and maybe as a freshman as well?
Yeah, sure. Again, thanks for having us and to have this conversation. It's good to see you. Jimmy, come on, we can still because this is so important. And thanks for all that you do. I have just been really blessed in the assignments I had in the military to have been in communities who just loved our military and supported our military. And in Arizona, where are Arizonans here? We have extraordinary groups in communities that support our bases and support our military and their spouses and their families in a way that is just extraordinary. So I'm really grateful for that. But as you know, we're part of the less than 1%ers, which means less than 1% who are serving or who have served. And so this disconnect that we're talking about today is significant. For me, what I chose to do when I was in the military as a fighter pilot and then as a commander, we would constantly bring school kids onto the base and give them the opportunities to be able to see what it's like to be in the military. I think a lot of people have a view that if you're in the Air Force, everybody's a fighter pilot. If you're in the Army, everybody's in the infantry. If you're in the Navy, everybody's a SEAL or whatever their caricature is. And I used to talk to kids, and I still do, saying, like, what do you want to do? What do you want to be? Like, what is it you want to do with your life? And, you want to be an accountant? You want to be a logistician? You want to do IT stuff? I used to say you want to pump gas back when we had a job of pumping gas, like whatever. And I would challenge people, you want to be a veterinarian? Like, it would challenge people, think of any job, any role, any profession, you can do it in the military. Try and pick one that you can. And what an opportunity for you to serve your country, build some skills, be a part of something greater than yourself. And so shattering the stereotypes for the young generation who don't have family members who served, of what it means to serve, I think is a big part of our challenge, right? And so the more we can do that, look, our job is to fight and win America's wars, so we can't be spending all of our time doing community relations, but where we can go out and speak at schools, where we can bring them in and have them see firsthand and inspire them, plant a seed as they start thinking about what they're going to do in the future. The military is an option. You can work hard, get a good education, get some skills, and do something meaningful. And so I just think the more that we can do that, both active duty, Guard, Reserve, and others. I still do that as a senator and did it as a House member. We have the blessing to nominate people to our military academies. I'm a graduate of the Air Force Academy, so I'm a big fan of ROTC as well, just a joke. But anyway, but as we go through that process, I'm trying to get to every school, because I don't want just the kids who are self-selecting, whose parents are maybe bringing them to our academy days, whose parents went to the academies. I don't want just those kids applying. I want the kid who's in tough circumstances, who's had to show resilience and grit and character, who's maybe got a parent with an addiction issue or one in jail and they're having to work 2 jobs in order to just kind of hold the family together as a teenager, but they're still going to school and they're still working hard and they're looking for opportunities. I want to find those kids and make sure that they know the military is for them too and the academies are for them too, because those are the kind of people that we want serving.
Well, that's amazing. And speaking of families, Maureen Casey with IVMF. IVMF is essentially the first interdisciplinary academic institute singularly focused on the lives of veterans and their families. Obviously, this platform has allowed IVMF to be at the center of researching this military-civilian divide that we're talking about over several years. And so I'm wondering whether or not you can kind of help us in the audience understand this issue at a deeper level from a kind of across the country perspective, but more specifically in defense communities.
Well, thank you, and I will echo the thanks for the opportunity to be here today. I do need to make just one correction for the record. I am not the Vice Chancellor. My boss, Dr. Mike Haney, would take great exception with that. But I am the Chief Operating Officer at the Institute, and very grateful for the opportunity to be here today. I think, as indicated, the IVMF is very unique in the sense that not only do we provide direct services and programs to transitioning service members, veterans, and their families, but that's also supported by a great deal of research that we do, particularly with military families in partnership with Blue Star Families. And I think that we've seen this idea of the military-civilian divide. And I was just recently at a meeting here at the Pentagon, and there was a lot of conversation amongst those of us who work in this business every day to get away from talking about the divide and start talking about the opportunity. And I think the senator just highlighted that we haven't done enough talking about the opportunities in the military as fewer and fewer of us have served. And I think that, as our research has indicated, it's sort of a two-way street. And this is not meant to be a criticism, but General Barno wrote an op-ed a few years ago where he talked about this idea that military installations, the way that they are constructed and situated within communities, is that there's sort of this natural separation. And then that gets complicated by the fact that military families are moving every few years, and they don't have the opportunity to engage and integrate in a community like others would who are new residents to a particular community. And then the other side of that coin, which is those of us who have not served, and it is becoming obviously increasingly more of us who don't know someone who has served. Given that we don't know, we're unsure about how to engage and what are the right questions to ask about military service and how do you do all of that. And as a result, whether we're talking about in employment situations or in servicing organizations and communities, there is a lack of cultural competence, if you will, to understand and how to engage in that conversation. And so I think part of what we're starting to see is actually having to help people engage in those conversations, get to know our military in a way that isn't offensive to those who have served. And I think that for us, the other piece that our research is pointing to is that it is at that point of transition, whether it's 6 months before or 6 months after, that creates the real opportunity to bring community and military together. Because if we get that right at that point of transition, whether we're talking about employment, whether we're talking about educational opportunities, we will head off those downstream consequences that some of us have seen.
Well, and speaking of kind of a lack of understanding, I think Mr. Austin, who is speaking on behalf of the Army Reserve today, obviously reservists and guardsmen in particular tend to be kind of the, I would argue, the forgotten service member or the invisible service member. And studies have shown that while they feel connected to the community as a civilian, they feel like their service is completely unrecognized and can even be a detriment to their civilian employment. Can you give us a little bit of a better sense of some of the challenges specifically that the Guard and Reserve members are facing as part of this larger conversation?
Thank you, Kristine, and I also echo my thanks for being here. And actually, I go beyond that because, and I understand we're installation-based, but I would point out that you have a Guard and Reserve that is in the community. So we, the Army Reserve, have almost 800 reserve centers and training facilities scattered throughout the country. The Army Guard has more. You put the Navy Reserve, Air Force Reserve, Marine Reserve. They now are your connection to the community, or the military's connection to the community. The problem is, and I spent 27 years active, so I never held two jobs at one time. I had one job at one time. I am a West Point grad, so I will say beat Air Force and beat Navy. The senator opened the door. I wasn't going to say anything. Well, I might have said something, but we are asking our reserve soldiers and reservists and guardsmen they have to have a balance. We want them to be as ready as possible, particularly given the current situation to the east and west, near-peer competitors, not to mention what's going on right now. As we speak, the Army Reserve have about 1,000 soldiers in Afghanistan and Iraq. We have about 4,000 in Kuwait. We have another 12,000 mobilized throughout the rest of the world and 10,000 on training. So that's just representative. So we want them to be as ready as possible, balance what the Army Reserve wants to do or wants them to do with their civilian job and family. And that's not easy. I know a lot of fairly senior Army Reserve soldiers that they have a day job, they come home, and then they have 2 or 3 hours of Army Reserve work at night. So for us, the whole community, I would say, okay, it's not just installation focus, it's across the country, reserve centers, facilities, everything else. So I would ask, and the main thing, what is it? Relationships. And it goes both ways. So we have to get our chain of command energized and talking to our partners in the communities and industry, and then I would ask the same from the other side.
That's great. So we're going to pump back to you, Congressman. Obviously, before you were elected, you had a unique perspective, much like Senator McSally, in that you worked in communities with service members. You were a service member yourself. And you grew up in a family that's been dedicated to military service. I'm wondering now, as we kind of have a better understanding of the issue, if you can talk a little bit about, from your perspective, what you think communities could actually do to bridge this military-civilian divide, and what ideas have worked in your own community and your local district?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, I was fortunate enough to grow up that I like to say is the most beautiful district in the nation, the Central Coast of California. There, where we not only have beauty with our environment, we not only have bounty with our agriculture, we have many military installations. And when I was growing up, I still remember as a kid listening and seeing the flashes of the ordnances going off over the hill there at Fort Ord, the former Fort Ord. I remember the woodland camouflage uniforms being everywhere on Alvarado Street in downtown Monterey. I kind of grew up with that. But obviously, with a base as big as Fort Ord no longer being there, we still have military installations that aren't as prevalent, but definitely mean as much. Navy Postgraduate School, Defense Language Institute, Fort Hunter Liggett, Camp Roberts, DMDC, Perserec, Fleet Numerical, and a number of other things. And it's making sure that people understand the value of those military installations, not just to our country, but to our community, and developing those types of relationships with the military installations into the community, but also what the community can do for the military installations. Starting with what the military installations can do for the community, we have this thing that my predecessor started, Congressman Sam Farr, called the Intergovernmental Service Agreements, where these installations contract with local public services, police, fire, things of that nature, to do those types of enforcement and provide those types of services. There's the thing that Martha and I voted on last year in the NDAA called CDIC, Communities Development Infrastructure Program, through CDIP, that allows basically the money for grants for infrastructure surrounding the bases for roads, things like that. But it's also having, like I said, the community being involved with the military installations. We're fortunate enough that we have such a strong history with our military that we have an organization called the Monterey Bay Defense Alliance that is there to ensure that, not only is the community, there are military installations strong, but our community has that continued outreach to the military installations, making sure that they take advantage of our schools, our colleges that are there, making sure that these military installations take advantage of the research that we have in nearby Silicon Valley, that type of outreach. And also on what the senator was saying, obviously after 9/11, a lot of these bases closed down, in the sense closed down to the public. Security was tight, and it was hard to get on base. I grew up going to the library at the Navy Postgraduate School. I had my proms at Herman Hall at Navy Postgraduate School. My cousin got married at Herman Hall. It was part of who I was. And I think the more we can do that, the more we can open up to our communities, to our kids, the more connection there is. But also focusing on something that's very important to our community and what I worked on before I got in Congress, and that's our veterans. I think the more we serve those who served us, that continues to develop that bond with our military installations. And so that's why we have a homeless veterans transition center. That's why we have a veterans treatment court in Monterey County. And that's why just within the last couple of years, we opened up a Central Coast Veterans Cemetery on the former Fort Ord to honor and to recognize those service members and their families for their service. And so the more you develop that connection to the installations, the community's connections to the installations, and to those who served, I believe that that's how you create that bond and make people more aware of the benefits of having our military in our community.
Thank you, Congressman. So, Senator, obviously you're a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. You hear a lot, I think, from communities like us about what we're interested in doing to support the military. Can you maybe highlight for us a little bit what you think, though, from your perspective, the military could be doing to bridge the military-civilian divide more?
Yeah, sure. Again, I think it's a partnership, right? And when I first entered the military, we were like little islands of bases, and we were doing everything ourselves, literally everything ourselves, right? Housing and hospitals and people would just go on base and never leave, and to have everything they need in their lives taken care of. That's obviously not healthy for community relations or for just their way of life and quality of life. In a resource-constrained environment, we've realized that that's not smart to do, that we need to have partnerships with our local communities. We need to break down the bureaucracy so that whether it's the emergency responders or in the medical field or wastewater treatment or other things where why are we duplicating these efforts? Let's partner. So we need to break down some of those barriers. Some have been broken down recently, but the more that we can figure out where the strengths are in the community, where the partnerships can happen across the boundary of the base, and that we're being efficient, all of us, with hardworking taxpayer resources, how do we create those partnerships and incentivize those partnerships? I think it's absolutely critical. We just came from a culture years ago of being like, nope, sorry, we're going to do it all ourselves. And we've got to figure out a way. And that also helps build understanding and relationships. I think another critical element, and this is something I've been very much focusing on, is spousal employment. While the economy is doing amazing right now and our unemployment rate is so low, and everywhere I go around my state, people are looking for workers, depending on how it's measured, the unemployment and underemployment rate of military spouses could be upwards of 25% or higher. And so this is unacceptable. And you also, when you hear from the spouse groups who advocate for spouses, this is not, again, your grandfather's military. We've got these amazing highly qualified, hardworking, resilient, innovative people that are sometimes the barriers are so high related to licensing and other things. Arizona, I'm very proud. I think Governor Ducey talked here. We've just passed a law to basically do all reciprocity for all licenses, and this impacts military spouses as well, so that it's not a barrier when people come to be stationed in Arizona. If licensing is the issue, they can bring one with them, and it's not a barrier for them. But there's so much more that we can do, I think, across the communities to make sure that the spouses are connected, and that's through employment. Their top way to be connected to a community when the spouse is on base working or is off deployed is for the civilian spouse to be connected in the community through a job. And how we do that and how we provide that information and that access for employers to be able to get on the base, to be able to do job fairs, to get access to databases, to work with the local chambers and other communities that are they're like, we want to hire these spouses, how do we do it? The military needs to, I think, be more open and accessible in how they're having those types of partnerships, because it does benefit our spouses, it benefits our military members, and it benefits closing that divide.
That's great. So I'll open that up to the rest of the panel. Obviously, we've heard a little bit about the DSIP program. Congressman, I know everyone in this room is waiting with bated breath to hear more about that as the NDA moves forward. Senator, you talked a little bit about military spouse employment, but for the rest of the folks on the panel, are there some other best practices or even opportunities for communities to be able to tackle this military-civilian divide in a way that's going to support both our military service members and their families and the economic vitality of the communities that surround them?
Sure, I'll jump in here to build on the conversation around employment. There's been a lot of work focused on how we better prepare our transitioning service members and spouses. I think there's two pieces to that. One, for our spouses, is to ensure that what we train them for, the opportunities we create for them, that there's job portability. Speaks to the certification issue that the senator mentioned, but also the nature of the careers that are and the job opportunities that are positioned for them. So one, for example, is around entrepreneurship and small business. Military spouses are predisposed to creating their own small businesses. They're very successful. The IVMF runs one particular program that is for women, veteran, and spouses. They have a very high job business creation rate, and more significantly, a sustainability rate almost twice the national average. So giving them the tools to build and create their own small businesses is one way that we can do that. There's another program that is built around the Career Skills Bridge Authority, where there are a lot of employers that are interested in hiring transitioning service members as well as military spouses, but we need to ensure that, one, employers understand the skill sets that our transitioning service members are bringing to the table, and two, that those transitioning service members are positioned for success in the civilian sector. Our research tells us that many veterans will leave their first post-service job at a rate of 60% within 2 years. We have to cut that off. We have to better prepare them so that it doesn't cost employers as well as not position our transitioning service members for success. We have one such program. It's called Onward to Opportunity. It's offered on 18 military installations across the country. What's unique about that program, and there are others like it, but it's giving them the industry-recognized training. It's giving them a little career coaching. More significantly, it's directly connecting them with employers that have job opportunities and the kinds of jobs they want, where they want them. So that end-to-end kind of solution that positions them for post-service success. I think the other thing that we need to just briefly mention is this idea that as our service members and their families, and we have to remember that it is a family that transitions, that when they get into communities, they struggle with access and navigation of care and services. In the military, it's a little bit easier to get the services that they need. Our research tells us that one of the #1 challenges of our transitioning military families is getting that access to care and navigation. Our communities, we owe it to those who have served, who are coming home to our communities, to make that ability to access and navigate care and services friction-free was the word I heard yesterday in talking about this issue. So there's a number of efforts underway nationwide where there's a focus on coordinating all of these service providers. There's 40,000 plus veteran servicing organizations in the country, in addition to other non-veteran specific service providers that do serve veterans as well. We need to make it easier for veterans and their families to access and navigate those care and services. There's a few of those programs that are out there. We do one called America Serves. There are others run by America's Warrior Partnership, Blue Star Families, and others. And I think we need to do more of that kind of work in our communities.
So I'll just pile on, particularly what Martha said with partnerships. Again, my earlier message, relationships and partnerships. And they're out Reserve and Guard is out in your communities right now. So what we tell our chain of command and relationships, they have to, in the local communities, they need to be reaching out to local governments, to local industry, and building that relationship. And part of it, we have a public-private partnership office that facilitates interaction, because there probably is no company out in the United States that does not have actually veterans, but I'm thinking active Guard and Reserve. I mean, there are some. So, and one of our targets is the larger companies. They can, you know, when you have Guard and Reserve soldiers and the other components rotating, mobilizing, they can handle that. It's the small companies that where it's hard. And it goes back to relationships. It goes back to giving them some sort of, planning. So you're going to rotate, you're going to mobilize a year from now. So we have to figure out how to work that in. And I understand that, Guard and Reserve, they're active on weekends, so it's kind of the opposite schedule. But I would ask all of you to reach out to your local reserve centers, and we're doing the same thing, and there are a lot of people rotating both on our side and your side, but we got to continue to do that. Nothing is easy, so we just got to work on it.
Thing. As you think of these partnerships, I visited a hospital in Phoenix that is basically hosting training for the Air Force in trauma emergency care as a blessing of us drawing down from Middle East conflicts. We actually have a medical corps that has less continuous experience dealing with trauma cases, and so the training where they're partnering with a local hospital that's already best in the region, in the country, related to trauma care, let the military get their training there. We don't need to duplicate that training in our military. So where your communities, every community has a niche where you are the best in the state or the country with some sort of capability that's out there. Think about what that is, and then let's figure out how, if you do it great, let's figure out what kind of partnerships we can have where we can have our military actually training in the community instead of us duplicating the training and having to simulate a lot of things, where those partnerships actually then benefit the community, benefit the training, benefit our military, and help close the divide.
Well, so speaking of closing the divide, and anybody on the panel is welcome to take a crack at this, but one of the ideas obviously floating around right now or being discussed is either reinstating the draft or mandatory military service or some form of national service. And wondering what you think about that. Is that something that you all think is a good idea to help close that military-civilian divide? I think both you, Congressman, and you, Senator, spoke about the less than 1% who are serving. Is this a way of kind of cracking that nut?
Sure. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And having some sort of national service program, I think, is something that should be mandatory in our country. It doesn't have to be to the military, but I think it should be something that actually gets people out there to serve, to participate. I mean, our democracy is about we the people. Therefore, it is left up to we the people to ensure our democracy moves forward and is protected and secure. And this is just a sort of a way to lay that foundation to get people to realize that you have to participate in it. You have to do something. And so, there obviously are national service programs. The issue that we find in Congress in coming up with that type of legislation is a pay for in dealing with that. But to me, I think it's worth it because, like I said, I do believe that, we are in an age of sort of what's been called hyper-individualism, where it really is people start to think about more identity politics. And I believe that we have to start shifting to community politics. And I think the way you do that is by prompting people to get out there and serve others. And it also helps the individual. It's not just a benefit for our country, it's a benefit for the person doing that type of service because they are then exposed to different types of people. And that's one of the best parts of my time in the military is having the opportunity to get to know people from all parts of this country, all walks of life in this country. And I think that benefits me as a representative of this country. And so obviously having that type of national service program is a great foundation upon which this country can move forward.
I would say it's certainly a noble thought, that let's have everybody take some time to serve, to toughen up a little bit, to, show some reliability, build some soft skills, and all the things that are needed for them to succeed in life. And as we've seen countries like Israel that has that service, you have teenagers making amazing life and death decisions as rockets are coming into Israel and they're having to decide, whether to engage or not. And then they go to college afterwards, and you can see the change in the maturity level. They are a entrepreneurial country in large part because of that kind of early, responsibility at a young age. So I think it's a noble idea. I think it's impractical at this time in our country for a variety of different reasons. Plus, when you look at military service, we are such a highly technical force right now. The thought of taking in every single teenager and being responsible for turning them into adults and giving them the training they need to actually be effective, and then losing them 2 years later, that makes my head hurt, because I just don't think that's a practical approach at this point in time. I think a better approach is that we in our communities, as parents, as coaches, as community leaders, as teachers, as faith leaders, we toughen up this next generation. We ask more of them. We encourage and inspire them to make decisions to either serve in the military or some other path where they can grow up and serve and be responsible and a part of something greater than themselves, while they also find a path to meet their full potential, provide for them and their families, and do everything that only America, offers to them. So I see it as a little bit more of a decentralized approach that we can do within our own families and communities, as opposed to mandating it nationwide.
So I will leave policy and the decision to my colleagues to my right. So I will not comment. I will say this is the 45th anniversary this year of the all-volunteer force. You have the most battle-tested, battle-hardened, combat-ready Army and actually military in the world. No one is as good as we are. And most of that is because it is an all-volunteer force. Everybody you go to in uniform is there because they want to be. Not because they, as Senator McSally said, so this is not the draft Army of 45 plus years ago. We have no peer.
I would echo something that the Congressman talked about a few moments ago, which is looking at it from the perspective of the moral obligation that we have to take care of our veterans, that all those who have served, and I would include families in that as well, need to know that they will be better off after their service. And if they know that they are better off after they service, they will not necessarily hesitate to recommend that to their families. We've seen in some of our recent research with Blue Star families that for the first time last year, military families, there was a reduction in the percentage of military families that would recommend military service to other family members. We have to correct that. We have that moral obligation to do that, to better take care of our veterans and their families. If we think about the fact that every person, even the most introverted people, will influence 10,000 people in their lives. So if we think about that fact that one veteran, that's 20 million veterans in our country, you multiply that times family members, if we treat them right, they will recommend service to others, and believe that the volunteer force is a reflection of that and where we are today. I think it's also looking at other aspects of our society. If you stop and think about the fact that last year, less than 1% of our charitable giving went to veteran servicing organizations. And yet, Americans gave at 5 times that rate to animal welfare organizations. Now, I'm a big dog lover, was born and raised on a dairy farm, totally believe in animal welfare programs, but we need to be looking at all of that. This is a defense community conference. My boss wrote an op-ed not too long ago where he offered some very thought-provoking suggestions around those that do business with our military and what is the percentage of philanthropic giving that they do to support our veterans and their families and communities. Look at higher education. An institution from where I come gets a lot of federal aid. What kind of scholarships and opportunities are they giving to our veterans, transitioning service members, military-connected students as a percentage of that federal aid that they get? So I think that all of us have an obligation, whether or not we served in the military, to look at all of these kinds of things to better position those of us who are of service age eligibility want to make that consideration.
All right, well, we've discussed a lot of really great ideas here today, but to close, and this is always the hard part, I'm gonna ask each of you if you could give us one take-home idea, one tangible thing that you think every single person in this room could walk away from this conference today, take back to their community or their state or their organizations that they work with. What's the one thing that everyone in this room could do today to help bridge this military-civilian divide?
For me, I'm very focused on military spouse employment right now. So whatever you can do within your community, the U.S. Chamber and other organizations, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. They've already got great programs out there that you could bring down to your local communities, engage with your local installations, identify where the jobs are, identify where the shortfalls are. If you have a 501c4 or something within your community, which many do, pour some of those resources into, supporting our military spouses. That gets back to whether they're recommending as their family, whether others should serve. If the spouse is miserable and underutilized, and the housing issues, which is a separate issue we've been dealing with, which have been awful. You add that all together, and if the spouse says, we got to get out, this isn't working for us, that's what impacts that. So the more that we can do to have military spouses and families to feel welcome, to be engaged in the community, and to have meaningful employment, I really think that's going to be the thing that knits us together in a stronger way than we ever have been before.
Yeah, what I said earlier in regards to making sure that we continue to serve those who served us. I mean, what I really see is an outpouring of support, for especially nowadays when it comes to recognizing our veterans, be it at national holidays, be it at local homeless shelters, or be it at local events that we do there on the Central Coast. I think getting out that recognition of their service and their sacrifice, but also for their families' service and sacrifice, is a way in which that support transcends from veterans to active duty military. We're fortunate to have one of the few DoD state-of-the-art VA DoD health clinics there, a combined health clinic, and having those two together, I think, is a way in which basically kind of allows that bridge, not just from veterans to active duty, but from our community to veterans and our community to active duty. So it's continuing to make sure that we live up to that, what I believe is our country's obligation to continue to serve those who serve us.
So I would ask that I got it, we focus on installations, but for everything we've talked about, like Senator McSally and spousal employment, expand your target. At the Guard and the Reserve, they're out there, they're in your community. So, anything, when we talk the military, we can't just focus on the active. We have to focus on all components.
I'm going to go back to the point of transition. I think that for what our research shows us and what our programs and services on installations and in communities demonstrates to us is that if we get it right at the point of transition, it will mitigate some of those downstream consequences that we have seen. So ensuring that we are providing the most robust transition programs that we can on installations, not only for the service member, but for the spouse and the family, because we do need to remember that it is the whole family that transitions. So whether we're talking about those employment programs or connections to community-based services, we need to get it right better at that point of transition.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our panelists for giving us so much time today. That's actually going to conclude our session.